else that I missed. So our program tonight is going to be a fun topic, I think, especially for this time of year. We usually try at the December meeting to do something not so issue oriented and not so serious. So our topic is flying squirrels, which are out there in the night, and perhaps you've seen some of them at your bird feeders like I do. Our presenters are Anna Mangan and Anna Peterson from the Natural Resources Research Institute. Anna Mangan works in the Mammal Ecology Lab, and Anna Peterson is a master's student who's been engaged in the research project that they have going up there. And so they're going to share with us their work and a lot of interesting information about flying squirrels.
I think this guy looks pretty serious. Yeah, so I'll be talking to you about flying squirrels. We had about a 2-year project that mostly wrapped up this summer, and we had 3 grad students working on that project. Anna Peterson was one, so I'm not going to talk about any of her work because she's going to do that for herself. I will mostly be talking about Katie Pfaff's work in this presentation, but Anthony did an equal amount as well. So,
is it going to work? It's always a thing. Okay. I may have to.
You can just
restart it again. Okay. Now it wouldn't go for me. It always does this. Everything. Hold on a second. Let's try it again.
How many of you knew flying squirrels were in our state? That is excellent. Usually we get a much lower percentage, and the people who do know about flying squirrels, there's like 1 or 2 who are like, oh yeah, I've seen them in the woods before, but mostly the people who are familiar because they have been in their house, which they are, can be pesky. But look at that face.
Yeah, try it out.
Okay.
There you go.
Perfect. So there are 3 species of flying squirrels that we have in the United States. We have the Humboldt flying squirrel that is on the West Coast, formerly considered a northern flying squirrel. But here we have, in this state and in the eastern part of our country, we have the northern flying squirrel and the southern flying squirrel. And if you look at this map here,
now it will go. I'm sorry, I don't know why.
No, it's okay.
It does the same.
I'm fine with you just clicking through for me too, if that works. That works. I'll just tell you when to click it.
It usually picks up.
Okay. So in this circle, we're kind of in this zone of overlap. So kind of that gridded lower section on the country map there is historically and currently-ish where southern flying squirrel ranges, and then the kind of purpley blue area is our northern flying squirrel, and where they overlap is what we call the overlap zone, or kind of their sympatric zone, which I'll talk about a little bit more in further slides. How do you tell these buddies apart? So in this graphic on the right side, we have the northern flying squirrel on the bottom. They tend to be quite a bit bigger, have a wider, kind of overall wider, longer tail, whereas the southern flying squirrel is smaller and also has a much pointier tail. If you're lucky enough or unlucky enough, depending on your viewpoint, to have them in hand, another way you can for sure determine the difference between the two. The southern flying squirrel has a belly fur color that is creamy all the way to the base, whereas the northern flying squirrel kind of has that gray at the base, and then it goes up. So let's learn about flying squirrels. They are nocturnal, which I'm sure you all knew, which is why they have larger eyes to help them see better at night. They have that little patagium, so they're not actually flying, they're gliding, and using that extra skin between their limbs there to help guide them among the trees. And then they've got a rudder-like tail. It's very flat. I'm not sure if you've ever been up close with a flying squirrel tail before, but it is very, very almost 2D. And that helps serve as a rudder when they're gliding through the forest. Another fact that I like to point out about flying squirrels, which we didn't do any research on, but is pretty cool anyways, is that recently in the last few years, they were found that they fluoresce under UV light. And it's this kind of bubblegum pink color. And so on the left there, you've got a flying squirrel that's under that UV light. And then you've got just regular light during the evening as well on this. And we have tested this in the field. It is real. Pretty strange. And people don't know exactly why they do that for sure. People are looking into it, but there are several ideas. One is that they use that to communicate with each other because they can see in that UV light range. The other is a way to camouflage themselves from predators, as a few working theories. So what do they eat? Flying squirrels eat a lot of things, and they tend to kind of tend towards one or the other, depending on if they're southern or northern. But in general, they eat things like lichen, fruiting bodies, so a lot of different sorts of berries in the spring and summertime. They eat the fruiting bodies of mycorrhizal fungi, primarily truffles. They go after a lot of mast, like acorns and seeds, and then they'll also go after insects, primarily ones that they can catch at night. Unfortunately, they are also for dinner. So they have many predators that they need to evade when they're out and about. Many owl species, Anna and I were out checking traps one morning and had quite an instance of a barred owl trying to go after a flying squirrel we had just worked up. So, and then lots of different types of weasels, martins, fishers. They're all interested in a little snack of a flying squirrel. And incidentally, hiking in Canada last summer, I just randomly found a flying squirrel tail on the ground. I used to do spotted owl work out west, and that was very common to find. The flying squirrel tail does not have much to it besides fur and bones, so those are often left behind by predators. So although they share all these similarities, there are a handful of differences between the two besides their body. So we have southern flying squirrels, we kind of talked about, are smaller versus the northern are a bit larger. The smaller ones tend to be slightly more aggressive. I kind of call it like the small dog syndrome, a little more pushy. They tend to prefer deciduous forest, whereas northern flying squirrels tend towards a more coniferous boreal forest. And they tend to consume more nuts and fruit, whereas the northern flying squirrel will consume more fungi and lichen. And one thing I'll just sidetrack into quickly here, because I'm not going to cover it anywhere else. There is a parasite that the southern flying squirrels carry called Strongyloides robustus. And that is kind of similar to what when your dog gets worms. They carry that. They're not negatively affected by it body-wise, but the northern flying squirrel has been found to be negatively impacted by that. So our other grad student, Anthony Rayona, investigated that for his project and discovered that there isn't much of a prevalence of that parasite here in northern Minnesota yet. Doesn't mean it won't be here. So that's one of the things we hope to continue to research beyond this project. The place that they overlap is that they both need cavities. And those cavities are things they don't make themselves because they are secondary cavity nesters. So they need something else, like a woodpecker, to create that habitat for them. And often those sorts of structures are only found in forest types that are more complex and have a lot of not down trees, but a lot of decaying trees that make that available. So in the zone of overlap that we were talking about, there are several things that can happen. In some neighboring states like Michigan and Wisconsin, this has been something they have started to see. And so the southern flying squirrels are in this deciduous zone type of forest. They start expanding their range more northward as, climate kind of shifts, and that changes the forest type, which is also tending towards a more northward expansion. And you've got the northern flying squirrels contracting their range as the boreal forest also contracts. Where they meet in the middle is in this area and a little bit beyond, which we'll talk about in a minute. But within that, a lot of things can happen. That parasite transference is a potential that I just mentioned. Hybridization, also possible. And then, of course, that called classic resource competition. So, like I said, this sort of expansion of southern flying squirrels north and the contraction of northern flying squirrels also further north has been documented elsewhere enough to give northern flying squirrels different sorts of protected status in different states in the eastern part of the country. So in red here is federal protection for northern flying squirrels. Yellow is endangered. Purple is state protection, and then in Wisconsin and Michigan, it is listed as a species of special concern. Here in Minnesota, it recently got identified as a species of, what was it again?
Special concern.
A species of special concern. So that's a new status for flying squirrels here in Minnesota, or northern flying squirrels in Minnesota, which is good. I think. Why study flying squirrels? Because there has been very little research in Minnesota. There are some simultaneous projects that were happening in the Twin Cities on flying squirrels, on the Twin Cities campus while we were conducting ours. But other than that, not much was really known about what our two species of flying squirrels were doing in the state. And we suspect there's probably a lot of similar interactions happening between the species as other research projects found in their state. Climate change effects I mentioned with hybridization and parasite transference possible, that competition for resources, which also, creates all sorts of different dynamics for food web and what predates them as well. And then I always like to add that another important reason is they're a part of our natural history here in Minnesota. And I think that is an important thing not to leave out when you're talking about different species and pretty cool, cryptic, iconic ones that we don't get to see very much here. So our broad research question sort of became, where are the squirrels here? How far north do our southern flying squirrels go? How far south? That flying squirrel picture, that flying squirrel is actually in West Hartley. Just wanted to on its present. How big is the space they call home, or what we call a home range? What does each individual squirrel require space-wise? And what sorts of resources are they using in that space? What are their nest-like characteristics? So here's the nest of this squirrel, which we took measurements on. Is there parasite transference? And essentially, can both of these species coexist in Minnesota? Is that possible? Or is it kind of a one or the other situation? So to do that, I will be focusing, we did a lot of trapping and handling. There are several different survey methods you can use, and we'll be about a really cool one. So I'm going to be focusing on more of a traditional method of tracking these and answering these sorts of questions. So essentially what we did in several different areas around Duluth is we set up traps or live trap tomahawk traps and baited them with peanut butter and sunflower seeds, which you can kind of see in the foreground of that second picture there. We checked the traps for squirrels every day. We did do some trapping in the winter in the evening, so we were checking them every hour or two in the night, if that was the case. We took general measurements on the flying squirrels' weight and sex and all those, measuring their tails, since that's a very defining feature of which species. And then we ear tagged and collared squirrels. And we didn't collar everyone, it would depend on who we had and if they were heavy enough to take the collar. But this is actually a picture of one of the collars. And they're quite different than, say, moose collars. The actual collar, just a zip tie, quite small. But they worked fairly well. A lot of squirrels got double collars or triple collars because they also are very chewy, as you might imagine. And the best part is we get to release them and have a fun little display. And so it's partway near the crook of the tree there. And then it goes down. So you can imagine having a rudder-like tail is pretty critical. So you don't run into anything as you're gliding down. Yeah, so once we had our squirrels collared, we would radio track them using traditional telemetry. We did that all year round for 2 years, and would track them during the daytime to their nest. So where they're resting, where they're reproducing, and just generally staying warm. And so at each site, like this tree here, that flag, you can sort of see the cavity at the top that we track the squirrel to. We were taking site measurements as well as very specific microsite measurements, things like the type of tree they were in, the type of nest site they were in. There's several. Besides just cavity, there's witches' brooms and burrows. Taking note of all of that to get an understanding of what each species of flying squirrel was choosing for when they were choosing that site. We also radio track squirrels to discover what is their home range, how much space do they need to get the resources that they need to go about their lives. So we had our inactive locations, which are our nest sites that I just talked about during the daytime. Unfortunately, we also had to become nocturnal to figure out what their home range was. So getting out and getting active locations required waiting till the sun went down and multiple people. You've all seen, if not flying squirrels, squirrels in general, and they're very spazzy and fast. And so we would have multiple people with telemetry gear, finding a squirrel and getting on opposite sides as best we could and taking bearings and measurements at the same time to kind of try and pinpoint where the location of that squirrel would be within 5 minutes. Which led to approximately, when we added both of the nest sites and these active locations, we call them, the ones we were doing at night, together about 25 to 30 unique locations per individual that had power. So we hauled our gear to quite a number of places over the 2 years. On this map, the blue is where we only northern flying squirrel. Red is southern flying squirrels only, and so those are the sites we call allopatric because only one species was found there. It doesn't mean that the other one is not there, but we never detected it. And then purple is both. So at Hawk Ridge and at the Fond du Lac Tribal and Community College, we found both species of flying squirrels, and we call those areas sympatric because they're both present. And we wound up coloring 41 flying squirrels and about an equal number of both northern and southern. And so our general nest site result, we found 230 unique nest sites. And we considered a nest site, a lot of times they would reuse nest sites, lots of reuse, typically cavities for both species is greater than 60%. Like I mentioned, they do use other types of nest sites. So down in this lower corner is an example of a winter burrow that was on the ground. And we considered it a unique nest site if one flying squirrel was in there one day and then a different individual came in and used it the next day, that counts as 2. So we eventually got 230. One kind of fun thing we found is we found both a northern and a southern flying squirrel one day doing telemetry in the same cavity together, which is pretty rare, but it has been documented before. As for the northern flying squirrel, Katie found when she did her analysis, this is kind of a nice little graphic, the kind of lighter colored squirrel represents the southern flying squirrel there. She found that northern flying squirrels chose in both the sites where only they were found, but also in the areas that they shared with southern flying squirrels, selecting nest sites in smaller diameter trees. And why that could potentially be a consequence is because larger trees help with thermal protection, they often have more food, and also are protection from predators. And she found that larger DBH trees in all zones, so sympatric and allopatric, southern flying squirrels were choosing much larger diameter trees, which is kind of represented in that lower graphic that she made. And then lastly, she found that southern flying squirrels were primarily in mixed and deciduous habitat, which is what people have historically found in other research. It could just be the fact that that's the type of forest that is on offer here in our landscape, but still something to note nonetheless. As for the home range result, high overlap for both. So flying squirrels were overlapping in their home ranges when they were active at night. It didn't seem like they were really partitioning and saying, I'm staying over here and you stay out, I'm staying over here. There was a lot of overlap in those home ranges. However, there was the greatest overlap in areas where there were both northerns and southerns. They were overlapping in their ranges a lot. So not necessarily partitioning their home ranges in that, the same way they seem to have slight partitioning in their nest site selection. So, like I said, there's lots of different survey methods. We've got camera traps, which work great to tell us if squirrels are there or not. It can be really tricky to determine, is that a northern squirrel? Is that a southern flying squirrel? So it's got some flaws. You've got nest boxes, which are great too. You can put cameras up and see them in there. You've got the live trapping methods like I talked about now, but a really cool application is acoustics. And so now we're going to transition from their cool ultraviolet fluorescing into some ultrasonic stuff. So I'm going to hand this over to Anna Peterson, and she will tell you about her cool acoustic work.
Hello, everyone. As Anna said, I'm also Anna. So there's quite a bit of fun introducing ourselves with this. But yeah, so before we go ahead and get into the acoustics, I'll just talk a little bit about their general distribution information. So this is a lot of the focus of my master's work was trying to figure out where they are on the landscape now, but also where they had been previously. So like we showed before, here's kind of the general range of our northern flying squirrels and our southern flying squirrels. And as Anna mentioned previously, we've got the Humboldt flying squirrel over there on the west coast. But again, we're just kind of focusing on this range of overlap that we have here in the Duluth area. So we're kind of the perfect spot to kind of answer the questions that we're really thinking about in our lab. So again, in this sympatric zone, there's a lot of things that can be going on, some of which that Anna already talked about. We have competition for food, perhaps nesting resources and parasites. We have that potential hybridization happening where we have both northern and southern flying squirrels. And it's really important to note that the sympatric zone can be really dynamic. So it can change from year to year, just based off of, for example, the mass production. If we have a really high mass production, those southern flying squirrels might be able to bolster north. However, if we then have a harsh winter, they might be pushed further south again. So essentially, we need an efficient way to monitor these changes from year to year, which is where we get into the acoustics in a little bit. But first of all, we wanted to see where have these flying squirrel species been in Minnesota historically. So the first thing that I had to do was to compile records from all the different online repositories. So there's a plethora of information online now as things are being digitized, which is awesome. So it takes a lot of time to go through, download all of them, refine all those records, because as you might imagine, across these online databases, there's duplicates for the same record. So it's kind of refining all those down. And then once we have those unique occurrences, we can actually look at those results in GIS. So this is just looking at our historic flying squirrel records pre-2000. So these are just from the online databases. On the left, we have northern flying squirrel, and on the right, southern flying squirrel. So in general, many of us might know, but Minnesota is primarily only forested in this region here, which explains why we're not really seeing any presence of them in that southwest portion of the state. And in the northerns, primarily in the north, southerns primarily in the south, which is pretty slick for us. But again, we're just kind of seeing that general trend of northerns and southerns kind of where we expect them to be. We do have this one site down here from Cedar Creek Reserve, which was not published data, but we're working on getting those records. And then again, for the southern flying squirrels, primarily in the southern portion of the state, with just a few of these guys up in the north. So what we can do with this is we build these zones. We have this zone here where it's the northern flying squirrel confidence zone, and we have the southern flying squirrel confidence zone, and then in the middle is that sympatric zone that Anna was talking about before, where we're seeing records of both species being present. So you can see here we've got Duluth again, and we've got a pretty big bandwidth north and south of Duluth historically. So this is one thing that we were kind of curious to see. So now we have this established. And then what we're going to talk about next is when we're thinking about getting this current distribution, so where we're currently seeing these flying squirrels. And I already mentioned that these guys are nocturnal and they're arboreal, so they're only out at night and hanging out in trees, which makes them pretty difficult to study. We have camera traps, which, as Anna mentioned, they can be difficult to actually identify which species is which, because you can't see that ventral pelt coloration, and there is still some size overlap between, for example, an adult southern flying squirrel and a juvenile northern. Live trapping, we did it, but it is really time intensive to set up trap lines, check traps, handle animals, etc. So we wanted to do something that would be a little bit more efficient and try to figure out if we could use it in our area. So what we wanted to investigate was using acoustic detectors because they've been shown in other places in the country to detect flying squirrels faster and to be able to identify them to species, which is super awesome for us. So the way that we can do this is with acoustics. So these acoustic detectors essentially go out on the landscape, record for a long period of time, and then we can look at the results of what they record and identify them as species. Woo. So again, this is still relatively new. Acoustic detectors have been used for bats and birds for several decades, but using them for flying squirrels has really only been used for about the last decade or so, just over. So the first time that they were used was primarily in a lab setting, and people have been slowly trying to apply it into the field to see if this is something that we can actually use on the landscape. And what's really great is about these detectors is that they're passive. You can just put them out onto the landscape, leave them. The new detectors now can be left out for over 2 months. I did a project in undergrad, but I really made it 10 days. So we've already come quite a long way with this technology. You also don't have to handle animals, which is less stress for us and less stress for them. So overall, it's really great for research. And what we can do is we can use the trill call, which is shown here for the northern flying squirrel and the southern flying squirrel. These flying squirrels make both sonic and ultrasonic vocalizations. These ones are ultrasonic, meaning they're above our hearing range, and they're species specific. So they make several other calls, but this trill call has the most distinction between species, which hopefully we can see visually. And this 500 millisecond time period, the northern flying squirrels have about 5 to 7 trill notes, whereas the southern flying squirrel only has about 2 to 3. What's really cool though is you can also hear it. So the program that I use allows you to pitch down the sound from out of the ultrasonic range so we can actually take a listen to what they sound like. So right now I'm going to play the northern flying squirrel. And then the southern flying squirrel. So a major goal of mine was to be able to build something in the acoustic software that could extract these calls out and differentiate them between species. And because we have this cool visual distinction as well as a hearable distinction, I was able to play and identify a lot of these different things. As you could kind of hear there, it's still a little bit high-pitched. And my cats and dogs were very interested into what I was doing all the time in my office, like all back and forth. About 2 years in, they're finally pretty used to it, unless there's like a really wonky one or something. So that was fun. But yeah, these acoustic detectors, again, are just really great. All we have to do is put them out on the landscape. They record. You can set them for kind of whatever your goal species is. So for my work specifically, I set them for flying squirrels, but you can also set them up for like audible frequencies or like bats, for example. That's your target. Again, yeah, now we can record up to 6+ with the acoustic detector, which is awesome. And then all I have to do is go out there, retrieve the SD card and pop it into my computer. And then you can just put a new SD card in and continue recording if you want to in the application. So the first thing that we had to do was pull out these flying squirrel calls. And as you guys might imagine, if you go out at night, there's still quite a bit of sounds going on, but there's also a lot that we can't hear. So we have the northern flying squirrel, which we talked about. We also have other things out there on the landscape that look and sound similar enough to northern flying squirrels that my poor little acoustic program would get confused. We also have the southern flying squirrel, which like to do quite a bit of variation with the way that it was vocalizing, whether that be over like one note at a time, several different call sequences, or at the same time as other species like bats. We also have a lot of noise, so think about wind, rain, anthropogenic noise, all other things that are on the landscape, as well as bats. Bats are awesome, but they cause a lot of problems for me because as they echolocate, that space between the notes changes. So they go from looking like a southern flying squirrel to a northern flying squirrel. So that also confused my poor program. But this all kind of came together, and I was able to use a clustering program that essentially breaks the soundscape into similar sounds. So it was trying to put everything that looked like a southern flying squirrel here, everything that looked like a northern flying squirrel up there, anything that was kind of being tricky but looked like a northern in a different cluster, et cetera, until it was kind of pulling out and breaking up the soundscape into these similar sounds. And using this cluster analysis, I was able to then process terabytes and terabytes of acoustic data, which is a lot of call files, and actually generate a filter that's able to pull these calls out, which is awesome. And now it can be used on reprocessing bat data. So we have decades of acoustic bat data that can now be reprocessed with this filter and you can pull these flying squirrel calls out of this bat data as well. So it's a whole new window to be able to get some more data for these guys. So just a look here, this is just looking at my project specifically, so the flying squirrel specific deployments, as well as some of the work that Dr. Ron Moen has done for bats from 2015 to 2017. So you can see here, kind of in central Minnesota, that's Reamer, home of Bigfoot, if anyone's familiar. We don't spend a lot of time with Bigfoot. There are some calls that I can't figure out what the heck they are, so there might be some potential there. But here's kind of the zoom in to Reamer. So these stars here are southern flying squirrels, and these 4 dots here are northern flying squirrels. And you might notice that these guys overlap right there, there, and there. That means that that acoustic detector both picked up northerns and southerns on the same detector. So as Anna was talking about, we have these sympatric zones. We also have sympatric sites. So we have 3 of those in Reamer. And then if we zoom in here to the Fond du Lac Tribal Community College, we want to have southerns, and the site here where an acoustic detector picked up both a northern and a southern. And then in more general terms, if we look at this map on the left there, we again primarily have northerns in the north and southerns in the south. But we do see kind of a little bit more overlap here. We've got some northerns hanging out over in Fargo, which is a unique thing that we kind of have here in Minnesota, is we have the Red River Valley. So the map, the forest region kind of goes like this. So these guys have to go like that. So it's an interesting thing for us thinking about southerns. And as southern flying squirrels, we're going to be getting over to Fargo. We kind of have a long way to travel. So something we're interested in looking at in the future. So now we can take all this acoustic data that we worked on and combine it with the database records that I have that are now post-2000, all the tracking records that Anna mentioned previously from our other flying squirrel work, as well as some work done by Concordia Moorhead and NRI small mammal trapping and Minnesota DNR. We also have the acoustic sites that I can now pull in, as well as some camera image work that was also done by Katie Pfaff. So now we've got this map that's getting quite a bit more filled in here for where we can see northerns and southerns. So if we once again do the same thing, we've got our map on the left of northern flying squirrels and on the right, southern flying squirrels. Again, we've got northerns in the north, southerns in the south. But if we now kind of combine these, once again, put on our northern flying squirrel zone and our southern flying squirrel zone, we're seeing a much narrower zone of sympatry. So we don't have any northerns south of this Duluth region, which as before, we had some down along this river area here, and then those sites down by Cedar Creek. And then for the southern flying squirrels, we again have several locations now north of Duluth, as well as just a lot more detections. But this is not adjusted for survey effort. So that's one thing to consider with thinking. So again, here's just that overlook here of where that zone has kind of changed and potentially shifted. We're going to be doing some more work with this and some more data as we work towards a different grant that will allow us to kind of apply this filter to even more data that we've now gotten from the Minnesota DNR, as well as a few of our other partners. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about these habitat associations that we've also been able to kind of look at this project. So as Anna mentioned, these flying squirrels have some preference for habitat. The northern flying squirrels are primarily associated with lowland conifer because of the fungi and seeds and lichen that are part of their diet. Whereas southern flying squirrels are associated with those hardwood habitats primarily because of that hard mass. So one of the things that we did is at every acoustic site and trapping site, we collected a suite of vegetation parameters such as cover type, dominant tree species, the diameter at rest height, as well as cover estimates using a densiometer and a few other things to kind of like try to figure out what's going on with where these squirrels are currently in the landscape. We were also then able to use this vegetation information to ground truth some of the GIS layers that we're going to talk about that I used in some modeling. So in general, as Anna mentioned, we had a similar trend in the acoustic and trapping data, where the squirrels were essentially behaving as we would expect them to, with northern flying squirrels primarily being in this lowland conifer. So you can see here this lowland conifer and subboreal habitat where we primarily had our northern flying squirrels detected. Whereas in the southern flying squirrels, they were primarily in that hardwood habitat, which again is expected from the literature. And then sympatric, again, as Anna was talking about, kind of on the landscape scale, this is looking at sympatry, so it's a little bit more mixed results. But again, we do have that vegetation data that we're going to be digging into this a little bit more and hopefully be able to answer a few more of these tied-in questions. And with this vegetation data, there's a plethora of information out there in GIS, and a lot of folks like us out on the ground collecting vegetation data who are able to potentially model where these species are in the future, as well as right now. So on the left, this is just an example of some output from using Model Builder in ArcGIS, which is essentially trying to inform where on the landscape based off of things like cover type and stand age, stand type, so coniferous, deciduous, where we might expect to see these flying squirrels. The same thing on the right here, this is using a modeling program called Maxent, where you're then able to also tie in climatic variables such as temperature and precipitation to once again try to model where these species are occurring. And these can be really helpful. As Anna mentioned, there hasn't been much work done on flying squirrels in Minnesota project. So maps like these can help managers try to figure out, like, okay, if we're trying to determine if northern or southern flying squirrels are present on a landscape, where should we look? It can really help us cut down on that, the time that's needed to make those detections. And with that, we would love to thank everyone that's been a part of this project. As Anna mentioned, Katie Pfaff and Anthony Briona. We did a lot of work on this project. It was really great. Anna was a fantastic project manager. So, thank you to Ron Moen and Michael Joyce for being the guys. We had a lot of awesome collaborators as part of this project. So for example, Mark Ford and Joe Whitaker, they helped a lot with the filter development and acoustic deployments. We were able to do some deployments at Jay Cooke State Park and Itasca State Park, which was really cool. Haley Anderson and the Fond Black Tribe and Community College were a huge help with doing a lot of the telemetry and trapping as part of this project. And a huge thank you to all the museum curators that I bugged. I'm still bugging about all those records that I was able to compile. And of course, all the field techs, without whom all the acoustic deployments and trapping and bench plots would not have been possible. Thank you. Yeah.
Curious, what demonstrates, is it the southern that is the most aggressive? The personalities or habits between the two that demonstrate that difference?
Like the aggressiveness?
I think that, yeah.
Well, when you handle them, the southerns are a little bit more bitey. They're a little bit more wiggly, very excitable. But I think for some of the papers that Katie looked at, they just outcompete northerns for a lot of the resources like cavities and stuff, which is so aggressive, more so that they're outcompeting, perhaps more so than like true spunkiness. But they are definitely spunky.
Mm-hmm. Well,
Yeah.
And there was just to add on to that, there was a study where they had an internal arena and they put conifer trees with cavities on one side, deciduous on the other. And when they just put northerns in there by themselves, they used it. When they put southerns in there by themselves, they just used the deciduous. When they put them both together, the southerns excluded the northerns from the deciduous and were quite aggressive.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
kind of like chasing a gray squirrel. Same sort of.
Were you able to get, kind of a two-part question, were you able to get any kind of density estimates on flying squirrel populations? And did you notice in cities, where there's so much bird feeding, are you seeing higher densities in those situations than in natural habitat?
I think Michael actually pulled a population density estimate, based on research and some things we were finding with our home ranges, and I think you concluded like 2 to 3 per hectare. Right, was it that?
Yeah, we haven't done formal modeling, that's one of the thoughts. Okay, but with gray squirrels, it's obvious, I think in basically nature area, we call like 100 unique gray squirrels.
And if you're there trying to protect your bird feeders from gray squirrels, and all the checking traps at Bagley would see gray squirrels learn, because we would also ear tag them. We were looking at individuals of both gray squirrels and red squirrels as well for the parasite transference piece of this project. And I saw gray squirrels pulling out bait from the back of the trap and reaching over the trigger pan to grab them. Like, they're clever little buddies. But as for whether there's a higher density in those more urban areas, we haven't really pulled that out. I don't know if you have anything.
Yeah, if you look at just capture per unit effort between some of the more rural and urban, we see a big difference for gray squirrels and maybe some red squirrels, but for the flying squirrels, there's not.
Interesting.
And I think it's a matter of they will hit bird feeders, obviously, but they also, where there's a lot of bird feeders, and this is kind of, they can't. So they can't fully exploit that. The same way gray squirrel.
So I have flying squirrels in my bird feeders. I never heard a flying squirrel vocalize. Do you hear them once in a while?
Yeah, when we're out doing telemetry, sometimes they yell at us.
If the nights are gliding, and you're like, oh.
Yeah. You like catch them with the headlamp, yeah.
When you set out the traps, what else do you catch?
Interesting question. Typically the only other thing, so for in the summertime is when, in the warmer temperature seasons is when we try to focus our trapping. We did trap at, during the winter. In that case, it was exclusively flying squirrels because we're checking them only at night and on a pretty fast turnaround basis, about an hour every hour and a half, so they don't get too cold. In the warm seasons, we catch all manner of things. Because we set them at dusk and check early in the morning. So depending on how fast we can get to traps, it allows for more things to get in them in the early morning as well. So we get gray and red squirrel, chipmunks, and I think a martin was caught.
Yeah.
And a rat.
Yeah, we caught a rabbit in the first week.
Which those traps, it's hard to tell in the picture, but they're not huge. And so, yeah, twice.
You didn't learn the first time.
But that's primarily what we get in there. We don't typically get much else. Yep.
Do you think that the effect of the demise of balsam fir in this might be? Would that make more cavities or does that eliminate time for cavities?
Could you repeat that question up front for the benefit?
Yeah, yep. So the question was about the decimation kind of balsam fir and them transition because of budworm and them transitioning into more decayed trees that potentially have or can provide cavities and things like that for flying squirrel. I would imagine the initial decay might be good because you've got those cavities. Decay in balsam, I don't know how often that's actually creating cavities. That doesn't tend to be a tree that we've found with many cavities. So I'm not sure it would be too beneficial, but we have seen one of our flying squirrels that were like, is this collar working? It was one of our first ones we collared, was in this witch's room in a balsam for like I don't know if this is right. And then it eventually moved to a different. So they will use balsam fir, and that's an important component of this, coniferous landscape. So I would imagine it'd be more detrimental. Yep.
We had a photograph of cavity that the squirrels had built in the snow.
Yep.
Given that, their susceptibility to predation relies presumably on their being able to glide away from at least some predators, so they can fly. Why would they create a cavity on the ground?
I think part of that is probably some thermal protection. Snow is really good at that, particularly in that case, because it wasn't winter. I think we found one cavity in Leicester that was in it seemed pretty deep at the base of a tree. It does seem more beneficial to have your cavity higher up in a tree, but that said, martins are very good at climbing. And as that flying squirrel is going in and out of the cavity at night, like that's pretty easy pickings for an owl too. So I feel like there's a lot of trade-offs there. I don't know if you have.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think we kind of think of it as a trade-off of what's gonna kill you fastest. If it's too cold and you're not balancing your energy budget, you're gonna die before you even encounter a predator. And they are able in some cases, and martins do this with fishers too, where they can find burrows that are small enough opening that could exclude some of the predators. So they're not just like in sphagnum where something could dig them out. It's usually like a small space between roots. It's a lot harder for a predator to get into. But yeah, it's sort of competing risks.
Yeah.
What kind of life expectancy does
The question was life expectancy. My apologies, I forgot to repeat the last question. I don't think it's long. You read more in the
I feel
literature
like
than
it's only 2 to 3
a
years.
couple of years. Yeah, it's not a long time.
They seem so vulnerable to me. And what is their secret? Through the ages, being here, with us doing little that we, and all the natural critters that like them for dinner. It's just, fascinating how they make it.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. And they, for thermal protection anyways, that's something I think we kind of walked around it a little bit and didn't particularly mention it just from a thermal perspective. One thing, you're like, well, the Southerns are used to that warm climate and it gets cold in Southern Minnesota too, but comparatively, and they've got that smaller body size, so they do find it is well known that Southern flying squirrels do tend to group up a lot more in cavities together to stay warmer. That's one of the cool adaptations that they've got to help survive and last, even though they are a little bit, seem a little frail or something. Yeah.
And I don't know if any of you have actually seen them move, you might see them move into your bird feeder, but they are fast. I mean, Anna mentioned we released a squirrel and I literally happened to be taking a video to capture a glide. I mean, that squirrel was at the back of that tree before, it was so quick. So they are really, really speedy because that barred owl had its leg to grab it. The squirrel was already back in the tree. So they are just really fast too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, maybe tamed at all, I think, or.
Very similar to a sugar glider. I forgot supposed to have this. The question was if you can have them as pets or if they can be tameable. I do know of instances where they have been brought into rehab facilities and were unable to be released, whether due to paralysis or being too young. And they have been kept in captivity and people do have them in their home because that's just where they are hanging out. But I don't know how well they're tamed. I don't know if they're good at going to the bathroom or just slide around your house from the bathroom. I don't know about that, but people do have them primarily only because of rehab situations, not to keep them as pets.
There are enough peanuts, you can train any squirrel.
Yeah.
Do they use a different roost site in the winter than the nest site in the summer?
So the question was whether nest sites change depending on the season, if they alter that up. Certainly that is a factor. I know there have been studies in Alaska and Canada that kind of show witches' brooms are used a little more frequently in different seasons to provide kind of that airflow and what have you. So it's not quite as hot. But yeah, I would imagine cavities are used more in the winter. I don't feel it that often. I don't know if you haven't anything to add. It seems just kind of on an individual basis. But cavities again are the primary selected for structure. And that is what we found in our study too. They all seem to prefer that and reuse a lot of sites and where you'd be like, that's a good tree. I'd live in there if I was a flying squirrel, like we know anything. And we'd find a different tree that good, but that was a tree we had 3 or 4 different individual squirrels selecting for throughout our study. So they find trees that they like, and part of this is to parse out why are they choosing that one? Which we're getting there. But I think you have to be a flying squirrel to
Yeah. They're so tough. 15, 20 below at night, and there they are up there feeding in the bird feeders. Wow, that little animal. They're pretty rugged critters.
I will say just from going out doing telemetry, they do often reduce their amount of activity if it gets so cold. Again, I think that's more of an individual call if they're, how hungry they are, how far away their food source is, or things like that. But yeah, again, there was another instance where the squirrel, even at not budging into 7 p.m. in the winter, I'm like, I don't know, maybe it slipped its collar or something, and then again, eventually it moved off. Want to just not find the right time. Yeah.
Was there use of different nests and stuff like that in their short lifespan? what is their life cycle? Do they breed continuously throughout the year or just different times of the year?
Yeah, good question. So it's kind of what is their life cycle? So when do they typically breed? So northerns and southerns usually only have like one batch per year, but southerns, I think they can have two towards like the end of fall, but primarily they're reproductive in the springtime. What's really interesting about that is that the trill call that I use for my research is really only produced during the reproductive season. So we don't exactly know what the trill call is for yet, but one of the thoughts is it has to do with reproduction. So for us, it was like kind of the April to like late May kind of time period where we're seeing the most of those trip calls.
That decreasing range of overlap that you showed in your slide, any idea what's that attributable to? Is it climate change or just, pressure from humans in general?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of everything, as with most things. But a lot of it, what we're thinking is just due to climate and like the shifting range of their associated habitats as well. Something that I'm going to be hopefully looking at in the future is some of the actual habitat change as well. So I'm using some of that in my modeling, but also looking at differences in fragmentation. So how well they can actually move, northward if they're southern. But primarily thinking climate change, especially with the southerns, limited thermally because of their body size. The warmer it gets in the wintertime, the further north they can go. And I think that's really helping to contribute to their expansion. Then not competing northerns as they go, and then it's kind of shifting the way.
If I could just add on quickly too, when you look at it side by side, we haven't seen a lot of evidence right now of southerns going a lot farther north than they were found pre-2000. The biggest difference in that zone of overlap is the loss of northerns towards the southern part of their range. Even though we didn't see strong evidence of this here, that's likely competition, parasite transfer, and honestly, it's climate-induced forest change. It's also human management-induced forest change. So we, as forest managers, we hold our forests from getting to climax condition, which is more of a conifer, white pine in a lot of this area. And we're holding them at even just aspen stands and turning those over frequently. We don't let them get back to the characteristics. I think it's all those things that pushed it to where it is now. And we want to understand that before it pushes them out. I'm going to put you on the spot. I get this question a lot, and I'm sure you have as well. So we're potentially changing northern flying squirrels for southern flying squirrels. Does it matter? We're losing one, we're gaining one. Isn't that an even switch? I don't agree with that statement. I'm just wondering.
They are going for different food sources. Is it dramatically different? No. And they are smaller mammals. Is that going to dramatically shift, whether oak trees survive? Probably not. My argument to that always, which is more of a bleeding heart argument, again, is like natural history of Minnesota. And I feel like that's important enough in and of itself to try and preserve. If you can only have one or the other, I guess it's better to have one. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's it. Like for me, I'm like, well, they're here. We want to keep them. But yeah, I think the thing for me is we don't always realize how complex things are until they might be gone. Think of the wolves in Yellowstone and the aspens coming back. I mean, it might not be that dramatic of a thing, but those minute differences that they have could potentially play a bigger role that we just don't understand yet. So I guess that for me is kind of like we just need to understand a little bit better about what they've got going on. But yeah.
And I would say, I mean, it's even really like one species to the other. Why does it matter? But like they kind of both serve in its own way, like the canary in the coal mine. They're kind of telling us how forests are changing potentially, and I think that's really important to pay attention to, which is part of the reason for this as well.
So here's a question. Are they all at all threatened in the south with a higher end of nocturnal temperature?
I'm not sure about that.
Not that I know.
Yeah, not that I'm
And the squirrels themselves still vary in body size across their range, so the ones that are further south might still just be smaller. I don't know exactly what that difference looks like. But yeah, I don't know about being threatened because of the thermal temps.
I caught them in Alabama, so.
Yeah, it's, I think the bigger concern, so they do, like New Orleans and Southerns up here that modify activity when it's really cold. When you go farther south, they modify activity when it's really hot. And it's more of a water limitation, and then because they're nocturnal cavity dwellers, they can reach lethal temperatures inside cavities in the summer. But they actually have a surprisingly high upper critical temperature that allows them to deal with that. Sorry.
You're fine. Yes.
So if we want to encourage them to come to our feeders or to what kind of things can we do?
Well, I've heard, I've not done this myself, I have heard that simply those window bird feeders, excellent attractant. And a lot of people that have those who have come up to us and talked about it, say, you know, they've got that motion light there too, and so that's how they're seeing the flying squirrels come in. Like we mentioned, for bait in our traps, we were just using peanut butter with sunflower seeds in it. And I think the peanut butter brings them in, it smells great, it's greasy and delicious, but what they're really going after are the sunflower seeds. And lastly, I will say that their Fond du Lac did such a wonderful job. We would often pre-bait just to be like, is this even a good place to trap flying squirrels? Is anybody out here? And if we think it is, and we would give them a call and say, hey, like, we're getting ready to trap. If you want to put out some peanut butter and a trail camera, see if anybody's out there. And when we would do that, you know, it'd be like, you're spreading thin layer on a cheap peanut butter sandwich, but man, like half a jar, and they got so many squirrels in there. So if you want to see some squirrels, I highly recommend a lot of peanut butter. But other than that, it's just, you know, habitat. If you've got cavities or anything like that, any sort of kind of decaying structures, like they're very attracted to that. Primarily what they're gunning for in the daytime.
There are nest box designs
Yeah.
you can find online.
Yep.
Yes, make sure the hole's small enough so nobody else can get it.
Oh, yeah.
If you know what a rotten nest box looks like, it's open on the front. That's what I use, and just hanging on, that's a white pine tree that it hangs on, and I just load it up with seeds after dark. You gotta wait for that.
Sure.
I just got by accident one night, noticed that they were using this feeder that I normally had food in
Nice.
during the day, so then I started doing that at night. That's worked great. They come almost every night.
That's excellent. Yeah, a lot of our, there was a den project that the mammal lab did, quite a number of years ago for fishers. And they got many, I don't know if it was on multiple den boxes, got flying squirrels using
We
that.
actually rebranded it the Flying Squirrel.
And then we actually out at Boulder, they have a few owl boxes out there. And we got one individual that was reusing an owl box, which I thought was very risky. But it stayed alive, cruised around for quite a long time. So I wouldn't recommend those as your options, but yeah, peanut butter, sunflower seeds. I had someone reach out to me via email from the cities who had read an article about what we were doing, and he put out just a platform, like anything. It doesn't have to be high either. Anything you do, they don't like to be on the ground much unless they're going for mushrooms or we capture them and they're like, oh my god. But so they primarily stay up, but you don't have to crank it way up in the tree. They'll come down and whatnot for a reasonable reach.
Well, the work you're doing is wonderful. I think one of the important things about this kind of a meeting is it helps us have an intersection with a living partner we don't think. And what we might do or could do is, I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Something I will say to that note that was pretty special was processing some of the acoustic data from a decade ago, and those calls were just in there. You know, the squirrels had just been out doing their thing, so it was just kind of like, oh man, like they've just been out there doing this, you know, long before we even realized that this was something they were doing. You know, so that was a really special moment I had sitting at my computer alone. But Like that.
Okay, well, if there's no more questions, I think that's a good note to end on. Thank you so much. Still cookies and tea in the back of the room, so I encourage you